Zai here with a quick comparison review between the Gigabyte XM300 and the Razer DeathAdder Chroma. Now a lot of people think that the DeathAdder Chroma was the base and they modeled this one after that, but the DeathAdder Chroma is actually a copy of a Microsoft mouse, which is actually the inspiration behind the XM300. So yes, they are very similar, but they're not the same. So you can just have a look here. There's a bit more curvature on the side of the XM300, but it's actually a bit thinner at the fingers. So the DeathAdder is about 6cm between my thumb and fingers there. The XM300 is more like 5.7cm. Doesn't sound like much, but you can definitely feel the difference. So in a way the XM300 is like a smaller version of the DeathAdder, but it feels different enough to actually change my entire grip. So with the DeathAdder I'm full on palm grip. On the XM300 I'm sort of palm, but I actually find myself wanting to put a bit of gap between my palm and the top of the mouse there, and actually use more like a palm hybrid grip, I guess you'd call it, maybe even slightly fingertip. So it's a bit of an odd design. I think the DeathAdder is a safer shape in that regard, but overall I prefer the XM300. But that might have something to do with these deep grooves in the buttons. They just feel much better to me. The DeathAdder just isn't as deep or as comfortable, but they're still good, and as I said, they are very similar because they're based off the same mice. As for the sensor, the XM300 has a very good 3988, although the liftoff distance is a bit high with it. The DeathAdder on the other hand has a 3988, but it's modified to become the 3989. And the main difference is that this one feels more responsive. The DeathAdder is the most responsive mouse I've ever used. So whatever they've done to it, I'm still not entirely sure. It was a good improvement. Still, in gameplay, it's not that big a deal. Yes, it feels better, but still overall I'd actually use the XM300. If we check the weights, there's nothing really in it. 100 grams on the XM300, and it should be about that for the DeathAdder as well. And yes, it's about 99 grams on the DeathAdder. The cable is a bit stiff, not the best quality on the XM300. I do prefer the braided cable on the DeathAdder, however usually I prefer the rubber because they don't rub on the pads as much. But yeah, this one, it's a bit of an exception, it's not that great. So in this case, I'd definitely rather the braided cable. As for the actual clicks, they're very similar, but I think the DeathAdder is just a little bit better. In fact, the DeathAdder is one of the most widely used MOBA mice, or so I'm told, and that makes it a really high recommendation. So the reason the XM300 gets recommended more often is because it's only $40 on Amazon, whereas the DeathAdder Chroma is about $55. You get a couple of extra buttons on the XM300, something that I think the DeathAdder should have had ages ago, but the quality just isn't quite there. I mean, the scroll wheel on mine is loose, so you can actually push it in like that. DeathAdder, no problem. The DeathAdder is one of the biggest mice around, and definitely a top recommendation for that alone, because there's just not that many big mice. The XM300 is medium to large, and it's going to suit people with hands between 17.5 and maybe 20.5 centimeters. For me it's quite comfortable, but I'd still prefer a smaller mouse, so I don't really use this one. That said, I did quite enjoy using it. So I've given you reasons to like both of them. Personally, I like the XM300, just a bit smaller, cooler materials and textures, some extra buttons, and it's just a fun mouse to use, and it's cheap. The DeathAdder though, it's probably the safer choice, because you're getting the Razer quality, which is actually pretty decent. The side buttons are better, the scroll is a bit better, the main buttons are a bit better. It's a larger mouse, it's used by a lot of MOBA players and FPS players, and of course the most responsive sensor. But if you're looking for a cheaper option, the XM300 is definitely worth a look. And of course, if you're just playing first-person shooters, I'd actually recommend you take a look at the Zowie EC1A. So me personally, I'd be recommending the XM300, but if I'm going to give you the safer recommendation, I'd feel better about recommending the DeathAdder just because of the issues that you get with the XM300. And by the way, it seems if you use a solid color on this mouse, it can have issues at 1000 Hz. So if you set the polling rate to 500 Hz, it's okay. But if you want to use 1000, then keep this on cycling mode, or maybe turn it off. I'm not sure about that one yet. But you know, it's a cheaper mouse, so you can't expect perfection. And software wise, the DeathAdder is definitely better too. So I hope that helps you in your decision. If you'd like more information, I'll leave the links to their full reviews on screen now, and also in the description. And if you want to help support the channel, you can look in the description for the links to that too. And as always, subscribe for more mouse reviews and gaming videos, like this one, and I'll catch you in the next.